Time to talk about what matters, and we have devoted a lot of time tonight to Shirley Sherrod. As you know, she was forced out of her government job this week after being falsely accused of racism towards whites. Well, for the past half hour, we have been revealing who she is. The facts of her life underscore just how outrageous this smear truly was. So with me now is Cheryl Conti of Jack and Jill Politics and Marc Lamont Hill, professor of English, Education, and Anthropology at Columbia University. Thank you both for joining me tonight. You guys doing okay?
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Pleasure, yeah.
Yes.
So listen.
Thank you for having me.
So, Marc, the conundrum for the first black president is that he can't really delve into the issue of race.
Well, that's exactly right. But part of the reason is because President Obama didn't run as the first black president or the first serious black candidate, as some would say. Instead, he ran as someone who just happened to be black. He was, as some would say, incidentally black. And as a result, you know, race neutrality, race transcendence was the narrative around him. So whenever he talks about race, he becomes racialized. He becomes the black candidate. And that's the last thing he wants in the public imagination. He wants to stay as far away from race as possible. And as a consequence, we don't get the serious type of racial conversations that we could have. And the other problem is he promised us that he had special insight into the dynamics of race in America because he was a black candidate and because he was half black, half white. We've seen none of that over the last 2 years.
Here's the thing.
Seen someone
I get that, someone who happens to be African American, and I use that, but usually it's on people who are involved, at least when it comes to racial issues. You can say that, but that doesn't, you know, he is black to many people. He's not just the person who happens to be black. Do you understand the distinction?
Absolutely, and there's no doubt about that. And over the last 2 years, if President Obama has learned nothing else, he's learned that he's also black to a big sector of the American voting public, particularly Tea Party members and others. But the problem here is that he wants to stay away from race talk. Whenever he talks about race, he reminds the American public about race in a particular way that makes them uncomfortable because we're so immature about race.
Well, Cheryl, Marc has a point. Is he uniquely qualified to deal with this but is not doing it, or in some way cannot do it?
I think he believes that he cannot do it, and yet being half white and having been raised by white people, he is in a unique spot. And he can provide a perspective that would be important, I think, to a lot of people. He has done that in the past, whether it was during the Reverend Wright controversy, during Skip Gates, you know, when he actually does take the time to reflect. The American people actually enjoy a mature and grown-up conversation from him. Okay.
I posed a very similar question to Shirley Sherrod when I interviewed her yesterday and the day before. I want you guys to take a listen and we'll talk about it.
You know, you heard your mama say this too shall pass. Mm-hmm. You know, we need to get into it. You know, it's not going to last forever, but it might get us to the place where we need to be. So, yes, he might get some negative press early on, but we get through that and then get to really trying to deal with the issues. He's got to be willing to do that. Is he not doing that simply because he wants a second term? You know, I don't look at it that way.
She is saying, Marc, that the truth is the truth, and it doesn't matter if you take flack for it or not. That's her point of view, and that's the point of view of many who fought the civil rights movement.
No, that's exactly right. Now, some could argue that operating outside the White House, we have the luxury of speaking hard truths to people in power, even when it's uncomfortable because there's nothing at stake. We don't have a constituency. We don't have a voting base. We don't have poll numbers. I totally agree that the president has some kind of political calculus that he has to take seriously before he says things in public. But there are moments where you have to take tough stands, and I don't think that he's consistently done that. Before he was president, Sean Bell was shot in the streets, and instead of speaking to power, he says, we should respect the jury's verdict. When we saw the Jeremiah Wright controversy, he gave what I call the Philadelphia Compromise, where instead of really talking about the danger of white supremacy, he made it seem as if black angst about race and white angst about race were all the same. We're all in this big community of frustration that has equal merit, and that's simply not true. Now, there are moments where, just with the Skip Gates controversy, I'd say he handled it properly, though.
I want to move on because I want to talk about the conservative blogger. I want to talk about the NAACP and the administration. The administration, many feel, threw Ms. Sherrod under the bus. The same thing with the NAACP, and the same thing with some African-American commentators who all commented in the beginning before they heard the entire clip, Cheryl. So there are many people who are not so sure how they even feel about these organizations right now.
Absolutely. The challenge for the NAACP at this point is reaching the new hip-hop generation represented by black bloggers online. When they criticized, the NAACP, when they criticized the Tea Party for and asked them to cleanse their ranks of racism, they were following the lead of black bloggers who have been calling for this for over a year. They initially received a strong response from black bloggers. Now the hip-hop generation is soured somewhat. The apology helped. At the same time, then you have Shirley Sherrod, who represents the current membership of the NAACP. In terms, she's 62, she's in that age. Women like Shirley Sherrod are the unsung heroes of the civil rights movement. They are the bridge between the old Jim Crow world and a world they helped to create. And so the challenge for the NAACP is how do they keep Shirley Sherrod's basically engaged in their struggle.
So Mark, I'm going to give you the last word. So where do we go from here? When we ran earlier a portion of this, someone said to me, maybe this will open up and we'll start talking more about it and it'll change things. And I said, we said that after the election of the first black president and nothing happened. Now we have this moment, we talk about it for a little while and nothing happened. Is that what's going to happen every time, you believe?
Until we make a substantive change, until we stop allowing right-wing media outlets to determine what our agenda is, until black leadership and black organizations like the NAACP aren't completely reactionary, based on the politics of the right, this is going to happen. And until you have an Obama administration that isn't, quite frankly, just scared of white people, you're going to continue to see this thing happen.
Yeah, and you said the last thing, that the Obama administration is scared of white people. I've heard that a lot. I've heard it on radio. I've heard people say it. I've written about it. And so many times perception is reality, Mark. So we'll see what happens with that. Thank you both. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Mark. Have a great weekend.
Pleasure.